Mhm. Oh, that's pretty sharp car back there. What is that?
Wow.
Um,
You're at the Tourism Bureau.
what's that?
You look like you're at the Tourism Bureau.
No, this was at the cul-de-sac event during Modernism Week
Uh-huh.
in Canyon View Estates.
Yeah, cool. Cool. Great colors.
Waiting on Jim and Mark.
Mhm. Did anybody know numbers for Coachella? Was there a count? Did anybody hear?
No,
No.
I mean, I think it was busy. It was busy. I mean, I think it was, I don't know if it was, I guess it was sold out. I think that, but apparently this weekend's gonna be busier. Oh,
Oh, let's see. Oh. Is this a little boy?
This is Sebastian.
Oh,
I have an
Oh,
excused
yeah.
absence from last month. I gave birth right on.
Of course, congratulations.
That's not acceptable.
He wanted to, leave a public comment, so, but it's gonna be back.
how does Mercedes like him?
She's like obsessed with him right now. It's really sweet. So we're really lucky. And just kind of in newborn land, he's a good little guy. So it's his first meeting, he'll get used to these real quick.
Oh, great.
How large is he? How many pounds is he right now?
I don't know what he is right now. Very big. He was born 9 pounds, 1 ounce.
Okay, that's
So
a
he's
big
a
boy.
big boy.
A big boy, yeah.
He was born 2 pounds bigger than my first. So
Yeah.
he's big.
And how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah. My sisters are here right now. So that's nice.
Okay,
Oh, that's good.
that's great.
Yeah.
And his name is Sebastian, you said?
Sebastian.
Yes.
Great name.
Uh-huh, nice. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Linda. Good to see
Wow.
you.
Good to see you.
Hey, Justin, seeing you're on the horn here.
Yes.
The city, I don't know if the city paid for this or if it was through the county. They added that median in front of the new county building on Sunrise, just north of Tockwitz.
I think I know the one you're talking about, associated with the health center, like in that area, Sunrise and Tockwitz, just.
Correct. Yeah, it's fairly new, beautifully landscaped. Some driver took all the landscaping out over 2 months ago, including the palm trees, everything, and it looks like crap and no one's touched it. So
Joel, do you know, is that a Caltrans roadway there?
No, that one is one of ours. We are aware that the trees were destroyed. We've talked to the developer and we're working to try to resolve it. Developer has a difference of opinion with staff on responsibilities over the median, so that's where we're at.
Are we trying to collect from the developer?
The developer through their attorney indicated that they planted the trees and did their maintenance, but a third party came in and destroyed them and doesn't feel that it's their responsibility to replace trees that they, by no fault of their own, were destroyed. So that's sort of we're in legal talks and using some of our opinions with the attorneys as well. Our attorney.
Okay. Okay, we can
Okay.
talk a little offline about that, but
Here's your answer. Okay, we're gonna call the meeting to order at 5:33 PM. We do the Pledge of Allegiance, Evelyn.
Thank you.
We need our flag up. All right, we'll start. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
And
to the republic for which it stands, one
one
nation,
nation,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty and justice
Justice
for
for
all.
all.
No flag. Oh, well. Could we do a roll call, please?
Commissioner Robin,
Present.
Commissioner Marshall,
He's here.
present. Commissioner Craig is currently absent. Commissioner Gassan,
Here,
Commissioner Fuderer,
Present.
Vice Chairperson Soto,
Here.
and Chairperson Bernstein.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, now we move to acceptance of the agenda. Measure, do we have a motion to approve the agenda? Do we have any comments?
I so move.
Commissioner Roberts, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Agenda approved. Approval of the minutes. We have both the minutes for the February and March meetings. We have a motion to approve both of them, or if not?
I have a question on the Feb 17 minutes. If what was published in draft was complete or if it's missing pages.
All the pages are there. I'm not sure if you can refresh your screen.
I apologize. It like magic. Thank you. Like magic.
Okay with that now?
No comment.
Okay, I move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Mark, you're still on mute, by the way.
I will just abstain just because I wasn't present for March 17th. But that's the only thing.
Noted. Okay, public comment. This time has been set aside for members of the public to address the Measure J Commission on agenda items and items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission. Although the commission values your comments pursuant to the Brown Act, it generally cannot take any action on items not listed on the posted agenda. 3 minutes are assigned for each speaker. Do we have any public comment?
We do not have any comments for tonight.
Okay. Now I am going to the welcome. So at our last meeting, I know a couple people were not there. We went through all of the projects and made recommendations based upon our previous votes on which ones should be moved forward for community initiated projects, which ones should be for regular Measure J funds, which ones needed to go back to either public arts or Parks and Rec, and which ones were not moving forward with. And that is summarized in the March minutes. But I did ask city manager if he could give an update, just because obviously we've submitted 1 million projects to the city and there is a much bigger process after that. So Justin, would you like to give an update? You wrote a very long one to me, but it'd be better if you speak directly.
sure. And I think the exchange we had, which I'm happy to address some of that content, was also a little bit about, where are we going forward with commission review and roles and responsibilities, et cetera, et cetera. I'll need to certainly lean on Joel a little bit, but I will speak for him a little bit and just saying, we just had a meeting on our capital improvements plan, the 5-year plan, as we're looking to present the budget. You recall that even going back last year, one of the things that I had indicated is that, we're kind of behind on projects and that really couldn't take any more on, which meant in part that there wasn't a real significant consequence to the council temporarily kind of putting all the Measure J funding in a pot rather than allocating it by project. So as we meet on all of this now, I'm still looking at the projects list, and it really is pretty lengthy. And there are a ton of projects that started in 16, 15, 19, 20, 18, you know, projects that are 3, 4, 5 years in the making that are still not done. So this is nobody's fault, but I'm learning more that I think we've bitten off more than we can chew in more than one instance. And so at the same time, we have projects that we didn't expect we would have problems with that we do. You can't predict it, right? Downtown Park, I think you guys are familiar with. Our baggage handling system, if you haven't heard, you know, we have issues that we're working through that are also taking their capacity. So we did talk about that list some today. A number of those projects are really easy to complete, right? Especially where other agencies are able to handle some of the project management, and it's just kind of writing a check. So those are relatively simple. Some of the projects still would take some sort of project management where we need to make sure we have capacity. We were already doing some shade structure projects, and there were some shade structure projects that would likely be a fresh round of procurement and not as much oversight. So again, a little easier. Joel and his team do need to do some things to kind of assess costs, because we weren't able to assist as much at the front end of that effort to make sure that, you know, that it's $1 million, right? And not $1.5 million or whatever. And I know that's going to take a little time. And I'm so sorry. I feel like a broken record. But really the team is just a little behind. We've lost a person on our team, and we're about to lose, you know, we'll lose another soon. In our budget process, we're going to talk to council about adding some capacity, right? We need to build more to keep up not only with the incoming money that we know has grown, but to catch up with some of these projects that are, I mean, many of them are 5 and 6 years old, right? So we're just behind, and that's really not going to resolve in weeks or months. Unfortunately, when we hire a new project manager or engineer, it's probably 12 months to get them up to speed. So we're going to have to do a deeper dive on this, but it's probably going to take us a year or two to really kind of align and catch up. That does not mean we're not going to get to those community projects for that long. As I said, a lot of them are kind of easy and we can just go. But I think the good next step would be for Joel and his team to sort of identify those that we think we can do immediately. And the ones that take a little more time, start to assign a schedule first to review from a feasibility standpoint. Do we have the price right? You know, and that kind of thing. And then 2, put it on the queue with his other projects. So as it stands now, each of his team members has about 10 or so active projects, which is a lot. Some of those are in design, some of those are wrapping up, but that's a lot. So I'm encouraging him to be really honest with himself and the team and you and council about the timing of those things. I'm comfortable suggesting to council that because you didn't spend $1 million last year, that we be able to supplement that with the caveat that we're already kind of behind, right? So if we can triage this with the easy stuff and then schedule the more complicated things, and we're going to have to do the same thing with the rest of our CIP, including projects that have no Measure J funding, and figure out what we can really get done as we build the capacity. So I apologize, that's a long answer. Joel, anything to add to give greater clarity on when we might be able to evaluate some of those projects?
Well, no, I appreciate all the information you're giving the commission. I, in my own words, try to convey that information also, not promising them that I'm going to be able to construct all these projects right away, telling them that it's going to take me some time to evaluate. And I think that's where we left it off last time, is that it's going to take me quite a while to get through just assessing whether the cost estimates are accurate or not. We take a stab at them now. The sheet you got was a sheet that we use for all our projects, where we'll throw in some percentages for construction, management, design, and it just kind of throws, you can see immediately, it throws the $1 million estimate or the projects to about $2.5 million. So it's just a really rough estimate, just so that we can have this conversation today. What the city manager is saying is correct. we have a lot of projects, and I'm not one to say no, but it is, sometimes I do try to express that we are, really busy, and that we don't have the capacity to just, every project you give me, I'm going to be able to complete right away, right? I think I've even said that if you give me $10 million, there's no way I could even do those projects in the next 10 years. So I think I've sort of been honest with this commission. I don't think I've held back when it comes to that.
Okay, we appreciate that. I have a few comments and questions, but I think Commissioner Soto has her hand raised.
Chair, why don't you go first? That's fine.
Okay, so just a couple of things. We do know that the projects that we had recommended to move forward with community initiated are over $1 million. We went with the assumption that we had $1 million from the prior year, $1 million year from this year, and potentially $1 million from this coming year, basically because we had so many projects that all seemed worthy that, and understanding timing that maybe, let us give you the full batch, because by the time we actually get to a lot of them, there potentially could be 3 million reserved for that. So I just wanted to clarify that. So we are aware it wasn't $1 million. My second question, I guess, in terms of engineers, because there is a lot, and we understand that this is just one small portion of all the things. Is it realistic? I don't know how many you're looking to add, that we're going to have enough that will be able to start catching up and using the Measure J and other funds as they come in, or are we always going to keep getting behind?
So we certainly don't want it to be always, right? But admittedly, capacity can be a bit of a slow moving ship. So I mentioned, I think it probably takes 12 months to get somebody up to speed and productive. You can recruit in 4 months if you're lucky. Although we've had a vacant Parks and Rec director position for longer than that, and we went through one round of recruitment. We really didn't land somebody. We extended the recruitment. We're in the stages of offering right now, but I already know that we've lost 1 or 2 of those candidates, right? So in this labor market, it's tough, and it's especially tough in boom economies for engineers and project managers and the like, because the private side is so active. We tend to do better when the economy is slowing down, because the stability of public jobs is the appeal. Whereas, I don't want to say the fast money, but oftentimes when we're in a hot market and we see inflation and prices are going way up, they're part of that, right? They're bidding higher on these projects because there's an excess of demand, and those margins enable them to be more attractive. They can offer more pay. So I don't know if Measure J is even a source of funding that can be used for administrative capacity. Maybe that's something we can explore. We need to hire at least one and evaluate. And I think it's probably more like 2 or 3 over time.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Once we exceed 1, we do kind of have to look at the management structure, because we have a way we want to manage these projects, and someone needs to manage the project managers. At some point, span of control and things matter too. So I think we can grow into that, and I think we could even resolve maybe in 6 months what we want our build out to be, and in 12 or 12 to 18, do that to where we could catch up and then keep up, right? Some of that is our own doing. We have identified so many projects, and this is a pattern that goes back a long time. I apologize if I sound like a broken record, but like we talked about a library a decade ago. When we look back, there would have been no way to do that library without not doing something else that we promised. And this goes deep. It's parking downtown. It's both capital and operations things. We've kind of loaded up an agenda that was never realistic. We're going to add a lot in our budget this year that's going to help us keep up. Adding project managers is possible, but when you see the budget presented to council next week, there's probably 25 more, maybe closer to 30 or 35 new positions we want to add to the organization. So the other thing is just going to be pacing that, right? We can't, sometimes we have 60, 70 recruitments going on simultaneously. And that's kind of our max, given our HR department. So it's not all doomsday, but we can't fall behind forever. We have to find a way to transition to a model that's sustainable. It'll just take us a little time to get there.
Mr. Soto, did you want to speak?
Yeah, thank you. So just a couple of clarifying questions. So what, and I appreciate the context of kind of the backlog of projects and kind of where you are in terms of recruiting for the city and all the capacity requirements. But just ideal scenario, like what is it's unclear to me what is the ideal turnaround time from when a project is approved or allocated in the budget to like acted on, right? Like it'd be helpful to know, like, we want, once a project decided, for it to be active within a year, within 24 months. Because it seems to me that by the very nature of our revenue and the decision-making structures within the city, that there will always be some level of, catch up. So is like 3 years minimum, from when something's decided to something is starting to be built, fine. Like what is the ideal time frame that we are striving for so that all the other changes that are being made are working towards that?
It's a great question. It's not quite a simple answer, and here's part of the reason why. If you look at our total capital improvements status log that I was just looking at with the team, we've got some things that we're doing annually, like slurry seal and pavement projects that are on repeat, right? And so we've done a bunch of planning. We've got a long list based on grades, and we want to do about 6 million a year of that. And we can do it every year. It's rinse and repeat. Taking another example, and one I cited to the chair in an email, this cycle 8, which is some intersection improvements and things that were all about safety, but is dictated somewhat by Caltrans and federal dollars. The call for those projects was in May of 2016, and they were ready to release the funding to start those projects like yesterday, basically. And I don't know if we know in 2019, if it's going to be 21, 22, 23, or 24. That's a big area of uncertainty for us. On top of that, the 5-year CIP never contemplated a navigation center, but we came along and said, boy, here's an emerging priority, and so we need to insert that. We also didn't know that, say, the downtown park or some of our other projects would be in dispute after they were supposed to be finished. So whatever plans we made to start new projects, some of our capacity is kind of still stuck managing those projects. So it turns out to be really dynamic. Once we're caught up, I think a typical project, you're kind of conceiving and planning, doing some due diligence in years 1 and 2, designing in year 3, constructing by 4 and 5, right? Does that sound about right, Joelle and Don? That's really generic because a shade structure could be 6 months, right? But a big project, it's a multi-year in that kind of time frame. When we do a 5-year CIP, hopefully the things we say we can do in year 3, we can do them in year 3, right? Even if that means starting in year 2. But again, that's kind of in the environment where we're caught up. When I look at this list, there are a few things that were started in year 1, and that they're things like an airport demonstration garden, a pretty simple landscaping contract. The bigger stuff, even like roof replacements, were conceived in 19, and here we are in 22. I'm sorry, that's a lot of information, but it really does kind of depend. Ideal is kind of as I described.
For the projects, because the Measure J projects, which even if some of them, as you mentioned, can go right to city council, which, maybe like allocating money for the Plaza Theater or increasing the road paving, will that go to them now? Like if in the absence of even though there's a lot of stuff engineering has to review, if it's something like increase the road paving to 6 million or give $1 million to the Plaza Theater over 2 years, that doesn't require engineering at all. And that just goes to city council to decide if they want to do that. Will that happen now, or is that?
Yes, I think for some of those things that are simple, so we're planning our first budget presentation, which is largely the general fund, the 25th, next week. We had planned on doing some of the CIP and the rest of that May 4th. Bottom line, we have to approve our budget by the end of the year. Since we're talking about some of the projects that would have occurred this year, and with those funds available, I think we can, as part of that budget process, say, here are some of these projects and flag the ones that are really a financial transfer. And then we just have to make the arrangements on how that happens. Is it reimbursement? Do we pay up front? Under what conditions, right? You know, when we're working with really solid partners that we know well, that's pretty easy, I think. So right now being like a 1 to 3 month horizon, yes. Some of the other things that are relatively simple, like where we had multiple shade structures, I think, again, I don't want to over promise for Joel and his team because they still have a lot to just clear from their plate. I think they're doing too much right now. Like 10 projects per person is a lot, no matter how small they are. And I think things might slip through the cracks at that clip, or certainly our team is too exhausted. So even some of the things like the shade structures, I imagine are going to be months, plural, out, right? And then the process of getting those, a little bit of design and selection, right? It's a simple shade structure, but is it 1? Is it 2? Is it multi-leveled? All those things. The procurement is probably 90 days total, I think, to issue, to get responses, and then to take it to council for approval and sign off. And then construction is probably scheduled and followed, what, a couple months out after we sign a contract, depending on whether there's a lead time on fabric and fabrication and then those things. So I think a shade structure is pretty simple and is probably 8-10 months out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Soto, do you have another question?
Yeah, no, and I'll speak for myself, but I think as a commission, we're in full agreement that is kind of the typical timeline, even for a simple project. And we are so appreciative of engineering and all of their work for our little community projects and also the larger ones in terms of all the context they give. I think what has been a struggle for us is not even knowing when things are going to get approved by council or just for review. And so that delay has been 6, 12 plus months before it even gets to engineering. And so, and I recognize there's on the agenda tomorrow, a conversation around commissions and kind of the communication flow back and forth between council and commissions. But engineering is doing miracles. Like, I totally get that. I think there's just a lot of other structural things that are unclear. And at least for me, I'm really looking forward to seeing those really cleared up because, as a city, there's only so much we can do to make construction faster or procurement faster. But I think organizationally, there's things that we're not sure of our role or vice versa. And so at least for me personally, that's what I'm most looking forward to kind of getting an understanding on.
I will just concur. That has been my frustration, is not with engineering not doing it. It's with not understanding our role. But that this is helpful. This is extremely helpful in what you've told me directly and what you've told the commission today. So
can I touch on tomorrow?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm calling people without meaning to. Tomorrow. I don't envision a significantly different role for Measure J. I think what I envision, number one, you'll see in the staff report, I think commissions should be standardized in terms of size. We should solidify that it's an advisory role unless otherwise delegated. We should create handbooks and template bylaws so that everybody's got those to follow. And then I think what's really going to make a difference is having an annual cycle like we had with council, where we say, first, let's get some input from the commission to council on what priorities ought to be. Then council gives something back to commission saying, this is what we'd like to see, right? So in a year where planning wasn't otherwise kind of done and on hold, we would have brought back to you that council is really interested in bike ped. And they're really interested in, looking at things through a sustainability lens or a social justice lens. And then we would have said, so for your projects, please please help us understand how they address those needs. You would then come back and say, with every other commission, in the next year, this is what we see as our workload, right? We're going to have a few months of this kind of planning process. Then we're going to go into community projects. And then we're going to, be in a place of evaluating projects. And here's what the whole thing looks like. We bring that back to council, they sign off, we bring it back to you, signed off, and we kind of have the year mapped out. That's also what we're trying to do with council priorities, is map out a full year's worth of work, break it down into kind of multi 3-4 months sections so that we're all on the same page about what's coming next and create that level of clarity. On top, we want to make sure there's something like a joint meeting once a year and at least quarterly some other touch points. We might talk about whether that should look like a report that this commission authors quarterly, or alternatively, maybe, I think it's hard for council members to attend monthly, but maybe they come quarterly, and on the agenda is a report from the commission to the council rep and from the council rep to the commission. We're going to build in those things to make it a lot more integrated, because everybody shares your feeling that there's some disconnect, and I have struggled to kind of take on the process improvement stuff and the other changes we've had in the organization, vacancies, et cetera. So I apologize. We've been behind on that too. I wanted to be further ahead. Losing our city clerk didn't help. Losing 11 of our really big top positions over the last 12 months didn't help. But I'm not making excuses. We're really close now to having that conversation and setting up that better, more predictable and reliable process. I don't see the role changing. I still see this commission making recommendations on the use of Measure J funds and the community projects.
I think one of the best parts of the community projects is that it actually could help council to understand what the community wants to see as they come up with their policy. So that would be helpful. One more question I have in terms of finances. So is there a report on how much Measure J fund, besides what's not allocated, is allocated but not used? I mean, so like if you got projects going back 4 or 5 years, is there a bunch of Measure J money that was allocated to projects which just we haven't been able to get to? So like an audit on?
Yeah, Nancy or Chris or somebody, are you able to answer that? I think you're saying what is the accumulated balance? And let's distinguish two things. Sometimes we have a balance that's earmarked, right? So we're saving for a project.
Yeah.
And then so I think you're asking about how much accumulated money has never been assigned to a project.
No, that we know. That's in the budget. What I'm talking about is what has been assigned, but we just haven't been able to get to the project yet.
I see. So committed but not spent.
Yeah.
That's a Joelle, right?
Well, it's a financial question.
Well, it's projects that we have that we carried over. So let me go to the carryovers. I could tell you, let me just check. 260.
As Nancy's looking,
Okay.
let me say that this is the other thing that we want to kind of tighten up. And when you look at our 5-year CIP, the team's done a great job, but it's complicated. We have so many restricted sources. Sometimes we're saving money, sometimes we're spending it. We've got balances, we've got incoming projections. Sometimes the money comes in more than what we planned. So we are also trying to tighten that up so we can more easily say, we've got X amount in balance, Y amount coming in next year, and Z amount is committed, and here's what's not, and like more quickly answer that question. It's just a lot of kind of computation and figuring that out and then keeping track of it.
Does any other commissioners have any comments? Commissioner Futter?
Well, I would ask city manager, you spoke briefly about using this money for staffing. Is that possible? I'm not sure when you can't find anybody to do the job, but someone to deal just with Major J before it gets to Joelle or Dom, or would that be helpful? And is it legal to use Major J money for that?
I don't know. I was thinking out loud a little bit, but it strikes me as a way to kind of deal with some of this that, especially with some of these smaller projects, if there was somebody that was kind of dedicated to some of the Measure J stuff, we need capacity one way or the other. And that would be one way to do it that isn't competing with other needs in the organization, right? If we had restricted funds. I have not looked into the legality of it, but that's something we could do if this commission is interested in that. The other thing I want to offer is that as we move forward from this position of being behind, one of the other things we could probably do is start to quickly, if we haven't already, look at some of the projects, both community and otherwise, and start to identify those that we think are really, really easy, right? I know, for instance, our police department needs to replace a bunch of radios. I don't know if that's something you guys would even be interested in, but if it is, that's an easy way to spend money and support an operation. And we could probably help you like identify those so that we're more likely to have something to show for the effort.
I would recommend too, I've thought a lot about this, when we're talking about community-based projects, to me, when our sub-team met, those are small projects. I mean, and along in the 57 projects, we have really major capital projects. I don't know what the figure would be, but I think community-based projects should be under a certain amount of money. And that's all we looked at, because we have just shoved, a lot of capital projects over to the engineers. And that's a whole nother process from what I see our community-based project. In looking at that again, we want small projects that, as you say, can pretty much easily be done. So maybe that's something as a commission we need to look at, to really not get into Mizell Kitchen, not get into these things that are really $1 million. They are Major J capital projects, not really community-based small things, if that's the philosophy we're working off of. I don't know if that would help the engineers at all.
We did put those as regular Measure J. The
Yeah,
large, the Mizell, the Plaza, the large ones were all put,
Yes.
pickleball, were all put through as regular Measure J. The ones, the 2.5 million that we came up,
Right,
I think, Joelle, were all the smaller community initiated ones.
yeah.
And just so you guys know, we talked about this a little while ago too, because each project, at least if it's of a certain nature, if you're building something, even simple like a wall or a fence, you tend to have a lot of the common elements, right? Site evaluation, maybe some drainage impacts, a procurement, a design, a construction. So 4 of those that are small might be more time consuming to manage than one of those that is more costly, right? Because each one has its separate process. Whereas, let's say the Arts Commission came or somebody and said, we've got this great idea to locate a piece of art that's beyond our budget. That's one of those cases where you write a check and it's done, right? The shade structures are kind of, in my mind, a little bit in between. They're simpler than building something from the ground up, but they're more complicated than buying something and plugging it in place, or turning the management over, like the uplighting on the visitor center. If the visitor center can go hire someone to do that and we don't have to oversee it, fairly simple to get that money out the door. Small projects sometimes slow us down because each one has its own contract, its own procurement, its own everything.
Commissioner Robin, did you have a comment? You're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that. Not really expecting a, sorry, let me rephrase. I'd like to offer this up as something for us collectively to think about, and for guidance specifically coming from Justin going forward. Digesting all of this, I don't think we have a lot of controversy around the community projects. They'll take some time to get done. They have merits, but I think we're all embracing those as good things to do, even if we have to wait for that good thing to come about. As I'm digesting a lot of what Justin is describing, if you will, my note to self is, we're never going to get past this buildup of accumulated good news funds. Great, Measure J has a big bucket that's getting bigger. The fastest way to be and most realistic way to spend it efficiently on a category that's absolutely essential, not going away, and will always be playing catch up is roads. And if there are other categories like that, that are deep buckets, and that bucket will always be challenged by future needs, I think that would be helpful guidance to the commission on how that money is best applied, because with the exception of grant writing for big ticket items, the only thing that comes to mind for me is the never-ending need to invest in roads.
That's super helpful. If I could address it for just a second, I would think of the portfolio of projects from that perspective, right? Which is not to say it's an all or nothing and that we need to sacrifice the really great projects we've conceived of, right? Libraries and these other things that I think our residents expect that we need to build anyway, and we want to use some of these funds for. But, and I don't think it's that we'll never catch up, although I do think transitioning completely to something sustainable is probably like a 2-3 year process. And then hopefully catching up as we get closer to the end horizon of Measure J and considering whether to extend it. And we can say, not only have we done the projects, but we're now keeping pace with that volume of revenue, whatever it is at that day. But blending the portfolio, if you will, the plan with some things like that, and then being thoughtful about what are the more intense projects that are so valuable, we need them no matter what it takes, really, like a library, like a fire station, and being thoughtful about how much of the work at any given time, especially, or maybe the next 2 to 3 years, especially as we're in that transition, shifting some of that would help tremendously to fewer, easier projects. And roads is a good example. I'm not suggesting that's the one you would select, but it functions just like you're saying, where we can scale that up and it's not a huge impact to the team, I think. Is that right, Joelle? I shouldn't speak so much for the team.
No, you're pretty much accurate, but the big projects also take time, right? You're actively managing. If you give more money, say 6 to 10 million, right? That extends the project longer, and it involves a lot of issues with communities, neighborhoods, people not getting their project done proper or in time. So it does scale up, and it is a little bit time consuming. So if you and you're right, the money would be easily used, very valuable to the city, but it will generate some work for staff. Maybe not the standard design bid build, but it does ramp up some need from our end as well to be able to.
But less time, right? If you added 2 million to roads opposed to starting a $2 million project, you definitely finish. Yeah,
definitely.
Are there any other, Nancy?
I have your number. As of end of March, the unspent project is 17.8 million.
From
And
prior, that's already been allocated?
That hasn't been spent.
But allocated to a project or just nothing? It's extra money.
I think they were carryover monies.
No, I think the question, because that's on your report, right? The 17.
Committed but
No,
not
those were
spent.
just, I think those were just carryovers from prior years' projects not completed.
But already allocated.
Yeah.
Okay.
That money's spent.
So you've got the unallocated of 17.6, plus you've got a 17. I'm just trying to understand the scope of projects. Plus you've got a 17.8 that has been allocated that you just haven't. I mean, the project actually could be undergoing, I should say. I mean, it just hasn't been finished. But that you have $17.8 million worth of projects which are already approved and by everyone.
Let me check. We're in a new, very complicated system. Joelle, do you remember if we included the budget in here that hasn't been approved?
Isn't the Measure J have to be like in a separate?
So I think if the commission allows us, I think we can regroup and do a report that shows how many projects we've allocated money to that are currently not showing up in our monthly budget reports, and we should be able to determine where that money sits. They're older projects that were conceived a while ago and put money aside that, basically in 2019, 18, we were moving forward with projects and the commission was allocating money and we would put it in a budget. I think we're easily able to do that. I'm just.
I think, and the reason I was asking this, because we talk about, it's not like everything that was approved prior to this year is all done and spent. I mean, that's what
Right.
the manager is saying. You're still working on that. So my question is, now you're talking like 20 million this year and 20 million next year, and could be another 20 million from previous years. Just to understand the scope of how much projects is going on is also helpful. I mean, it's a lot of money, which is great, but that's a lot of projects.
Right, and historically in the past, we had at least one session where we did a true up, where we would show you that information in a spreadsheet form. And I think we could still do that. But as Nancy said, there's a new system that we're trying to learn, and I think we should be able to once we learn how to use it properly, we can get that a true up, if you will, of all the money and all the projects where it sits to, at that time.
Are there any other questions or comments? I don't want to. Been helpful, but I don't want to.
So of the 17 that's unspent, I'm sorry, about 5.5 million is sitting in unallocated. As you recall, we brought the 5-year CIP program to the last budget meeting last June, and the city council wanted us to remove that and go over that at a separate time. So of the 17.8, about 5 million something, 5.2 has not been allocated, just sitting there. But Joel has that programmed already in his 5-year plan.
But this is prior to the 21-22 budget.
This is the 21-22 budget, the 5 million that they never approved for spending.
Well, isn't there 17.6 million from the 21-22 that's not allocated?
No, 5.2 is not allocated out of the 17 million. The rest have been allocated prior years, but have not been completed. So like Joel said, we have this new system, and when we look at the general ledger, it tells us capital projects, and we go by project strings now. It's a little more cumbersome than it was in the past. So we have to run all the project codes to come up with the details of which projects are in there and what the balances are in those.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but in the 5-year CIP, there are programs like the library remodel where there are Measure J revenues assigned for future years, things that haven't come in yet, right? So,
Yes,
so I know,
that's correct.
so revenues have grown, right? So at whatever point we thought there was revenues of X amount, we allocated those in the 5-year CIP, but now there's Y amount, there's something greater. And that really should be the gap. So the 5 million was 1 year's worth of funding that council said, we still want to kind of validate where that goes. But assuming for a minute that still goes everywhere that we assigned, the only thing unassigned should be our increase in Measure J revenue that was not projected as part of the budget. Is that right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe we can move to this. Why don't we move to the financial report? Because then I think there's a confusion here, because when we go to the budget for the 21-22, it shows 17.7, which is unallocated. I realize that. So, and what you're saying, I think, is that if the council approves the 5-year, they'll take the 12 million out of that, even though we haven't really gone through that yet. That's just going through the 5-year, through the 5-year plan.
Yeah, I put a placeholder in it, like I put that 5 million in for a placeholder for 2021, or no, for 21-22, and I guess somebody blew up that, what is that? So I hurried and removed it. So I just wanted to put something in there as a placeholder, that's what we have sitting in basically unallocated, but it's truly allocated through Joel's 5-year plan. Do you remember that at the last meeting?
Okay, so just so you know, my original question was regarding other money from prior years that we already said this project's been approved by everybody, but we just haven't been able to, because we don't have bandwidth to be able to do it. So is there a Measure J pot from prior to the 21-22 that we already have projects assigned, but we just they haven't gotten to them, they haven't started, or they haven't finished.
Yeah, and we will have that information available to you in a report. We used to do that in the past. So we will have that to you at the next meeting.
Yeah,
Okay,
and what that sounds like to me is we would project the total Measure J revenues by the end of the year, which would mean everything accumulated before this year, everything we expect to come in at the end, where it's assigned, and what is left that's unassigned. Right? And then
And
for
it-
the assigned projects, we could probably say something about what is the status of it? Is it on hold entirely? Is it underway? Or something like that?
and I guess the last question, sorry, but if city council approves the 5-year CIP, which has about $12 million of Measure J funds, that's what potentially could happen in the next month or two. Is that correct? Or 3 months?
So we are still in the latter stages of planning how we're going to present the 5-year CIP. And one of the reasons is because all the stuff we just talked about with capacity, what I'm a little reluctant to do is say, here's plans for year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, if those really aren't plans. So you know what I mean? Like if year 5 might be year 8 is what I'm saying. So I think what we will likely do is show council the entire CIP so they understand the gravity of it, the size, and all those things. And we're going to focus on a small subset of the projects that would be potentially started in the next fiscal year or just beyond, right? So that's a small group of projects. The rest of the CIP would stay intact, but the CIP exists both separate from the budget as a 5-year projection, and then it gets incorporated into the budget during the 1 year that things are funded. So we're going to do a little of both, so that they are not committing when they adopt the budget to anything beyond next fiscal year. By showing them the CIP and covering it kind of largely, we will get some level of feedback that we're on the right track with that planning or not, but a new council could change that. What we want to be very accurate is what might start next year or just beyond that horizon so that we know what projects are next in the queue.
And will they ask at any point for what, I mean, we looked at it, we discussed it, it all looks pretty good. Will they ask for whether Measure J officially just says, yes, we recommend this or not with any of the projects? We haven't really done that, but not that they don't look good.
So I guess I would look to this commission for some of that. I'm not familiar enough on how that was presented because some of it was right before I arrived. If the commission has looked at it and thinks, yes, the use of Measure J funds is good and appropriate, then we could certainly relay that. If you feel like this commission has not made that determination, then we'd have to think more carefully. Has this commission not looked at the way Measure J funds are allocated to projects in the 5-year CIP?
We never really, we never really reviewed it. I mean, in last May, we were shown a draft of it. And then the next thing was, we don't want you to do anything until city council tells you priorities. So it's been tabled since last May. So this was the frustration, so that we haven't weighed in on the 5-year CIP officially. Is that correct? Anyone agree with me?
Yeah, we essentially were asked not to deliberate until council deliberated, but now council's deciding.
Yes. So I'm sorry, I guess some of this was right when you started. So this has been the frustration, that council is now going to make decisions without having our recommendations on anything other than those community initiated projects and the few ones we moved over. Not that we didn't look at, when we looked at it in May, none of us said like, oh my God, this is crazy, we don't want to do this. So but we can set that as an agenda thing for next time. Commissioner Gazan?
Yeah, I guess for Justin's benefit, I'll just kind of simplify how this commission in a nutshell used to work, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. With community initiated projects, they were very simple projects in the past. This is the first time that it's a menagerie of a lot of different things, and that we had so much community input. We generally would get input either from another commission or through one PS, and it would be very laser focused. So for several years, we spent, I don't know how many million, Joelle, on hotspots. That's putting sidewalks where they were missing, crosswalks were needed, stop signs, etc. That was about $3 million. It was about 3 years. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that we needed council approval for community initiated projects. I think those were designated by Measure J, that 1 million a year was set aside for Measure J to their discretion to advise how they wanted to spend it. Now, council may have to approve the budget once it went through planning or engineering, but other than that, it was driven by Measure J. Now, every year we would be given a list of projects that were a priority from the city. And this generally came out of your office, the city manager's office, along with engineering. And it was a big laundry list of capital improvements for the city. We would debate those. We would try to stay on budget. We would try to be very responsible with our evaluating all these different projects. We might have maybe only $11 million to spend for that year. So we would try to stay as on budget with those different projects listed that were generated by the city. They didn't come through the community. They did not come through our commission. They came through City Hall. We would present every year in May in a joint council session where Measure J sat with the city council and we went through our recommendations for however many projects. And again, it depends on the $1 million amount. 1 year, I think we had like 14 million and we were able to push forward about 12 projects. The last time we did that was in 2019. Council approved all of our projects that we recommended. So we were in sync. That was the last time we met, May 2019, that's 3 years ago. And then those projects, because they approved that, then move forward and they are funded by Measure J. They're projects that could have been funded by general fund with the city, but no, this is what our commission is designed to do. We're looking at this amount of 17 million a year that we generate and say, we give our blessing for these projects. Now, council can overrule that blessing and say, no, we'd like to see some of it get spent here. We'll pick and choose. And that can happen. But the last time we met, it was a unanimous decision and those projects should have moved forward. Now, obviously, through the pandemic and a lot of sea change at City Hall, a lot of those projects probably have barely even been initiated. Some have been completed. But in a nutshell, that's how we've worked. And I think, that's to Jeffrey's point or Chair Bernstein's point, that's something that hasn't happened since 2019. And I can't believe we're already to May and we haven't been given that list. It usually takes 3 or 4 meetings for us to look over this to give our recommendation. So instead, we're just focusing on the community initiated projects.
That is super helpful. I apologize that I was not absolutely clear on that. What I thought happened is that this commission had made recommendations for the use of Measure J in the 5-year CIP. It was presented to council. Council did decide to kind of consolidate those into a placeholder because they didn't know why Measure J selected those projects. And that's where I came in to say, let's wait until we get some strategic priorities. But it became apparent we weren't ready to pursue those projects. And that's why I kept delaying it. I did not know that you had not formally, in your evaluation of those, said, yes, these are good projects.
No, we have not. That's what I've been saying this a few times. We did not weigh in on the 5-year plan as we were told not to do anything until council gave policy direction. And so that's why we,
if you,
I realized that they never had to take it, but that was the role of the commission, that we would spend the year. And just one correction for commissioners, they all came from the city. And the only time, we didn't really, sometimes when we say something like the Mizell that we want to present to city council, that really has to go on Joelle's list. We've already pre-approved it and that would still go to the city. So, but yes, normally we would review the money outside of the community initiated projects and saying, this is what we recommend. Then when city council sat down at their meeting to decide it, they were like, they've had an independent group already vet these. We may or may not agree with them, but at least they had something that it wasn't just listening to not just staff, but had something in addition, a third party in addition to staff to go through it, even though we walked.
So I would like to just sort of jump in a little bit and try to give my recollection of the 5-year CIP that we did last year, that I brought those projects forward very similarly to how we brought projects in the past. The only difference was that I transferred that information into project sheets and called it a 5-year CIP. I believe this commission did deliberate. We did look at those projects, and those projects that I put in the CIP, there were very few. I think it was about 6 to 8 projects total. Those are the ones that were presented to council within the 5-year CIP that eventually got tabled. And I think I told this commission that if I'm starting the CIP, I'm going back to those projects and bringing them forward again. So I'm not introducing new projects. So that was sort of my interpretation of what happened last year with the CIP. It was the projects very similarly. Right now I don't have my list, but it was very projects that the commission agreed to. And I just called it a CIP because I think it's a different format. I presented as that, but not the full-blown CIP that the council will look.
That is not how it happened, and that's what we've been saying. We did not deliberate it. We said this looks pretty good, and then we were told to wait. So we did not, and I've said this directly. We did not deliberate. We did not go through it. Not that it's terrible, but if city council asked us if we reviewed and approved, I don't think anyone here could say that we did.
I recall them sending you the 5-year. It's on the web page. And I remember.
I can just interrupt. I have put this directly in writing to the city and that we have not reviewed the CIP on several occasions. So we can say that we did, but we did not deliberate. And as Commissioner Gonzalez said, he's been on the commission longer than anyone. Well, Mark was there before, but in the recent commission. And every year we would have the list of projects that would go through. The community were very small because we like every year with sidewalks or something or various things. And we would go through this 12, 15, 17 and engineering would say, here's our list. And what do you guys think? And we would go through it and deliberate and make a recommendation. This year, when they came to May, said, instead of doing that for each year, we're going to do it for 5 years worth, which we said, that's great. This looks really good. But we never went through it. So the idea of spending, $10 million on library, which I guess that I'm thinking that we all would have agreed to. I shouldn't say that. That sounds like a great plan. We never, you have 2, 4, 4 in there. We never deliberated that.
Right. And I may have misspoken. I think there was a list of projects for year 1 that were brought forward. The distribution of the funds over the 5 years for all the different projects. That's probably what you're saying you didn't review. So I agree with that.
So wait, just so I'm clear, are we saying that because sometimes I hear you say we looked at it and said it's good, but didn't deliberate. What was it that you were okay with the year 1, but didn't deliberate the remaining 4? You don't feel like the commission signed off on the first year's Measure J funding for the first year of the CIP. The whole reason I've kind of been put, and you probably can see where this is coming from, Chair Bernstein, in my email. I'm like, look, we can't even start the 5-year CIP year 1 yet. I've been under the impression the whole time that what you meant is the remainder of the 5-year CIP, not the first year. Because even when I came to this commission, I thought the frustration was that the council, rather than allocating the specific projects, pooled the money. And I thought once we distributed that back to the projects that we were basically going back to a Measure J recommendation.
No.
And I recall talking about the fire tower training facility, how you guys thought it was very important. The Muth Dog Park, and that you thought the emergency generators were very important. And I think Linda mentioned about the Victoria.
We talked about it and we were told directly to hold off until we got city council policy direction.
Okay, well then I guess I must have missed
So,
something.
so I know for sure that I made that comment after, because I came in April, right? So whatever happened in April and May, my comments about holding off were after the council made their decision to consolidate the funding in one place. And so that's the point at which I was saying we should wait for the remainder of the CIP until we get that strategic direction. But I'm certain that I didn't make, if somebody made that comment before, it couldn't have been me.
Yes, so it was not you, Justin. So
Okay.
the process that Commissioner Gazan laid out was prior to we even having a 5-year CIP booklet. That booklet only came out last year in 2021. We were preparing to do that in March, April of 2020. We were going to have the joint meeting in May of 2020. And then, as you know, in March of 2020 is when COVID happened. The community shut down. The city didn't know how to budget for that. So a lot of the Measure J projects that were not started, their budgets went to zero. And we didn't have the joint meeting because we didn't even know how much Measure J money we were going to have in a society that just shut down. And so the commission really didn't have much to do because we did this rolling budget. We didn't know, how to rely on these numbers that were coming in, the sales tax money. Turns out we did pretty well, but last year, my recollection is that we were going to have another joint meeting with the city council. We were rushing to get the budget done. There was some talk amongst the commissioners that, like, how do we review this big 5-year CIP booklet when we don't even know what the council, the council hasn't had this joint meeting where we can talk to them and know what they want us to prioritize, because all the projects are good, all the projects, are good uses of Measure J funds, but like, we really want to hear through this joint meeting, them to hear what our priorities are, and for us as commissioners to know what their priorities are, so that when these projects come forward, you guys as commissioners can make a better decision. And then every few months we were like, okay, we can kind of have that meeting, but what Nancy did, or what the city council did as part of the budget deliberations, was they said, okay, like this $5 million, we want, I think it was $5.4 million. We want it to go towards facility projects. We intend to meet with you, Measure J, to figure out what facilities need some money. And the caveat was that if there were things that are falling apart and need to be funded, do it right away. But we were intending to have this joint meeting with Measure J to figure out which facilities to focus on. And so that kept getting delayed. And then there was the thing about the strategic planning with city councils to get them prioritized. And
So
then,
if I could just jump
Right.
ahead,
that-
the joint meeting with city council was never to get their policy direction.
oh,
We, at the beginning of each year, we would have a list of projects from engineering,
right.
and we would review that and go through. And then at the city council meeting in May, right before they did the budget, we would say, these are the uses that we recommend for the Measure J for the following, to use.
Right.
And it was only in the after COVID, after that, when we started to meet, and then city council said, we don't want you to decide even deliberate until we give you policy direction. And that's been our frustration with never meeting, because for the first time they said they wanted to give policy direction, which we thought was great, but they haven't given that in 2 years. So this is what we've gone through. We did know very quickly in 2020, by August, when we gave we allocated the $3.5 million to the park, that we were going to start having money coming in. So, and we have not met. So they changed it in the middle of how they wanted the process to work, which was great. We were happy to have policy direction, but they've never given that. So
Chair, if you don't mind, let us go back and piece some things together. Again, I apologize if I had a misunderstanding. I thought part of the frustration was that council took of the first year of the CIP where dollars were allocated and consolidated it, because in the whole rationale that council gave was that they didn't know how and why Measure J came up with those priorities. So I was always under the assumption that Measure J had signed off at least on that first year. And I thought all of the requests to review the CIP were the rest of the CIP, but that year, and it sounds like you did review it, and I hear you saying it was good, but that it fell short of formal approval.
It was
And
not,
everything was good. We didn't debate it, you know.
it was just like, oh, this idea of a 5-year plan looks good
I
and these
got it.
kind of projects look good. But, you know, for instance, just to give it an example, you know, for years we said we should allocate some money to the library until they determine what they're doing. The CIP then said, okay, here's a more definitive, not just what you have left over, but here's 2, 4, 4, whatever that number is. I can't remember exactly. And we looked at that briefly and said, well, that makes more sense than every year just seeing what's left over.
So let us go back and piece that together and figure out how to close this gap.
My recommendation, and I know Commissioner Soto has a comment, that we move forward at the next meeting is still before City Council, and we are going to go, if we deliberate that it's not really much time, but we can do those $11 million of projects and put that could be the focus of the next meeting. So at least we don't show up at City Council when you're reviewing the budget and they say, and we haven't said anything.
We were planning on doing some of the review before the next time you meet. So we're going to have to reorganize and discuss some of this likely offline as a team. And I'm happy, Chair, to reach out to you and make sure we're all on the same page. What I also might suggest is similar to what we're doing with council, which is probably not presenting the whole thing, or maybe not even a full year, but a subset of groups of projects that we think is more realistic that could be started next year. And maybe we bring that to Measure J and say, can you look at this and are we on the right track, or do you disagree with any of this? Let you deliberate those, but it might be smaller than what was even originally the whole list for year one, because that might still be bigger than what we can do. So let us zero in on what we think is at least a dollar amount or a subset of those projects, and figure out what happened last year and close the loop on making sure you have input on that.
Okay, Commissioner Soto, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think this is a really prime example of engineering doing really great work. We looked it over, said, this makes a ton of sense. And we were not able to get an agreement with council on how to move forward, to provide our recommendations, to move forward on how they compile that information so that we can formally deliberate and provide our own recommendations. So I just want to underscore, we did see the 5-year CIP. We liked it in concept. We did not create any structure in between commission and council on how we were supposed to use that document.
That makes sense. That's helpful.
Yeah. And then in terms of, in May and June, I think as a commission, and again, I just speak for myself, like we are looking forward to providing input in some way before the end of the fiscal year, but yeah, whatever way is actionable, I think is going to be the most useful.
We'll find a way to make it happen.
Yeah,
I think I realize some of the confusion. I think sometimes what happens is a lot of times City Council, when they say it looks good, or this is even a good concept, sometimes we conflate that with this is approved, or I shouldn't say we conflate it. Sometimes we get direction, sometimes we get a vote, right? So I'm not going to speculate that did happen, but it's possible that staff thought when it was presented and said, oh, this is a good concept, that meant bring it forward. I'm going to go back and likely watch.
I think you could also just look at like the minutes from like the June meeting or something,
yeah.
and you'll see, because that was our first expression. Commissioner Gazan?
Got a lot in my head, but I'll keep it brief. Yeah, I just want to make sure our Measure J is not on some projects that we have not discussed. I'm nervous when Nancy brought up the fire tower or whatever. I know that we did not approve that, or move that forward in particular. I mean, we didn't have a chance to even debate it. So I just don't want, this is what scares me about miscommunication and not being clear, that council could look at something and say, well, gee, what is Measure J up to? They suggested this or that. And it's like, we didn't even touch it. So I just want, again, I know that processes can change. That's fine. Don't leave us out of the loop of these changes. And we just want to work the way we used to work and the way that Measure J was designed. We are supposed to look at every project that Measure J funds are spent on, and they have to be capital projects only. They cannot go for staff, anything else. It's capital improvements only to the city. It could be something as boring as a new roof on a shed somewhere, or something very sexy like a downtown park. But we need to look at those things. A lot of times council didn't even know what we were going to be presenting to them annually. And they would look at the list that's coming from the city, however those came about, that we debated, and we would prioritize. And if this is a 5-year look, great. We just, again, I think we've all made it very clear, so I'm beating a dead horse. We want to see those projects. That's the way it works.
If I could make one last, sorry,
Measure J.
if I can make one last recommendation that we have going forward with city council, is that policy direction for Measure J, I think you are far, my opinion, you are far better off as for staff and as trying to manage this city if you recommend that we do it the way we did before, where we take your and engineering's expertise and do our assessment, and understanding that we are able to, that we can make those recommendations to city council in absence of their trying to define a clear policy direction, which we sort of have now. They can always change it and override it. I mean, it came up, that has happened in the past, but if they're not able to communicate and meet and give this policy direction, which they haven't done, then we don't really need that for most of this, because we have your expertise and engineering's expertise, and better than anyone what the city needs. We can come through and say, listen, we want to spend in the plan $10 million for the library because you think that's a good idea and engineering thinks that's a good idea. And city council can come back and say, we don't want to buy a library. Let's forget it. We just want to leave what we have and let it rot. That's fine, but they're not going to come up with something different. So that's what I would recommend, that we have their vision once now, and we just, in whether or not you're going to have a new city council, potentially, it could change again. It doesn't make sense to try and get them all together to give a vision for how to use it. You have the expertise, and your staff and the whole staff, has the expertise.
I do think that's what we envision. I think that's consistent with what I kind of described of sharing notes with the strategic direction. That's exactly really what I meant. Again, let us go back. I think it's pretty evident that some of the staff team thought what I thought, that it was kind of presented, and that we were just differentiating between the first year and the remaining years, which I always anticipated coming back. The whole reason that I've been kind of delaying is because I felt like I was saying, we haven't even gotten to the first year. We don't need to get to the rest yet. And now I better understand that you think you never did the first year. So things make a lot more sense now. Again, it looks like I was not the only one with that impression. You're exactly right. City council said, we don't know how Measure J came up with this. Those were their words. So I probably took for granted that, and it was presented, right? So it's not that it wasn't touched. It sounds like what it really was is a difference between a cursory review and what you would consider deliberation and approval. And that is a meaningful difference. But it sounds like we were not exactly on the same page since then about what was done and what was not and what wasn't. So I'm going to go back and look at it for my own edification. But the bottom line is the deviation that now I see what you see, we were never trying to take that away. We thought that 1 year was done and we were waiting to do years 2 through 4 or 5 because we weren't even ready to get to it, right? So I was trying to buy time, and now I understand better that you feel like you never did the first step.
Which I will just mention, the other issue is that this was also the big impetus behind us pushing the community initiated projects, because we were feeling we had no review of this. So now the other result is you have a whole list of whole brand new projects that are on top of the already workload, which we focused on the last few months because we had no plan. And that's the other reason why we took some of those and moved them to the regular Measure J fund, so that when eventually there was this list from engineering that said, here's all the projects, what do you think we should do next year? Those would be on that list.
I assure you, we will get this cleaned up and straight. Our intention is to preserve the basic cycle that you have described, where we share notes, you make recommendations, and the recommendations go to council. I don't anticipate any of that changing. So thank you for your patience. I apologize for the frustration that's kind of accrued. We will get it straight.
Okay.
Commissioner or Chair Bernstein, can I suggest something? Since you've already have a list of projects that you recommended for regular Measure J funds, would it be of useful of the Measure J Commission's time for the May meeting if you were to prioritize those projects, because you already have the application sheet, you have information on it, your commissioners have read through them, and then you could actually discuss, which are the priorities of those. And then that would be useful because maybe we could slide some of those high priority projects into the budget for next year. It's just a suggestion,
I
but
think it would be helpful. I think it would also be helpful, though, if we included the first year of the 5-year CIP, so that if city council comes back and says, Measure J, what do you think? We don't come back and say, we haven't discussed it yet. We can at least have a first year. And I suspect normally we do spend several months on this. We've obviously already done the ones already. But if we say we want 500,000 for the plaza, we can add that into your first year CIP. And what we actually used to do is there would be a memo that would go to city council saying, here's what we recommend for the Measure J budget. And it would have all of this backup. So I would suggest we look at the first year CIP that you have, plus these other projects that we've said for the regular Measure J funds. And if you want, we can say include, because we haven't had this discussion with them, that we have a total of $3 million for community projects, which would be 2021, 21, 22, and 22, 23. Without getting into the specific projects, those will come back at a later date, unless they can go forward right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the CIP that I was building really did that already. Went back to year one because those projects essentially were zeroed out and brought them forward again. So that list sort of exists already. And I may have added one or two that would be new to the commission to look. I think going back to the original conversation that the city manager has, our capacity is limited. So introducing more projects from that list that was generated may not be feasible. I think, and I don't think that's what Justin was recommending. We want to also pare that list that I have created down to something that's attainable in year one, things that can be done maybe in the first year and the second year. So I think we're going to work on this, revise it, and it'll be something that the commission can review in the next meeting.
We'll get your priorities from the list you're describing, right? So that we know if we can't do it all, what's more important to you and less. But we will give you the opportunity to look at those lists as you're describing and establish your priorities from that list.
Yeah, and also just reissue what the latest version of the first year of the CIP is.
That's right.
So we can actually, I think that would get everything. If we get all of this done this cycle, it would get everything back on track.
We'd be caught up for the planning at least. Yeah.
For the planning, we understand this. We understand there's more you can do. We're not, we just want to have said money may be allocated. It may not happen yet or whatever, or it may go into a future year. We understand that. We're not being unrealistic when you can and can't do. And then for what would happen, basically starting up again after June, in September, the commission looks at the next budget and works. Then what they do is they work with engineering to come up with, over the next 6 meetings, what the plan would be to present to city council at the following June budget meeting. Yeah. And we, at this point, you have the visioning. I don't think we need to have a policy direction because it's already there. Commissioner Marshall? You're on mute. You're on mute still. You're on mute. There you go.
Am I not on?
Now you're on, we can hear you.
Okay. I just wanted clarification. You keep mentioning, because I just now finishing my first year, so I don't know everything you've talked about. So when you're talking about the first year CIP, are we talking 2021? Year two is 21, 22, and then we're projecting something for 22, 23?
First year CIP is 22, 23.
It was designed initially to be 21, 22, but nothing got done. All the projects kind of got shoved aside and now it's carrying over.
Yeah.
Okay.
But these were projects that were contemplated last May or before.
Mhm. Mhm.
Can I get a copy of that list so that I am up to date?
Well, we're going to be
Because if
bringing.
you're going to redo it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and again, to clarify too, we're going to go look at the meetings and try to get a clearer understanding of what was discussed and where the ambiguity came from or the misunderstanding. But we will close the loop on bringing the first year of CIP projects back, along with whatever other lists of projects you've discussed, to get your priorities from those lists.
Mhm.
Yeah, and what I would suggest is if we could look at, if we can find some documents from 2019 from May, and you'll see exactly how Measure J would submit to City Council before our joint meeting.
Mhm.
And that would be the one that's really, I think it was May, right? That would be the
Yes.
one, that would be the one to look at, because, and Commissioner Gazan was chair at the time, so he can also clarify a lot. But at that point, we would all sit in, we'd be at the City Council meeting and he would present it. They would ask him questions. They would go back and forth, and at that point we had gone through, we had spent 6 months, we had 10 or 12 projects, I can't remember what it was, and they said, yes, we approve, this is going through the budget. And we had already vetted it through engineering and staff and all of that. I mean, obviously things, we took, some things end up changing, but that was always the process. And that was more helpful, I think, to the city manager and staff as well. Is there anything else on the, well, I'm not sure that we've sort of covered now everything there. So,
Mhm.
Commissioner Marshall, did you have another comment?
Yeah, well, I just have a question since I wasn't able to attend last time. The draft that we just, on the minutes, who put that together on the 3A, the project rankings discussion?
That was the result of the last meeting. Those were the ones that that was our discussion for the whole last meeting.
Okay, I've got a question. I just need an explanation. I know Chris Mills presented or talked to you about the Mizell project. Is there a reason why, like on Mizell versus Plaza, it says it doesn't have to go to engineering? You can give it.
Can I just mention, you can't actually comment on the Mizell, but
I'm not commenting, I'm asking a question.
I know, I don't want to do anything wrong, but I'm going to answer the question anyway as a general thing. Just so, because what the discussion from last time that happened, there were certain things that had engineering reports or estimates on things. And so before we said to City Council, should you approve or not, we want engineering to weigh in just to make sure that we're not allocating $1 million for a project that's really a $10 million project, or that will never get done, or just was not feasible. That was the only reason. The difference was certain things like the Plaza Theater, engineering has no input that needs to be done in relation to our specific recommendation. Obviously with the whole project they do, but we're not asking for that. All we're saying is we want to allocate some money for the plaza should it already passed engineering and other funding sources. That was the discussion we had.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, well, are there any other topics, any other discussion on this? I have the feeling that we are at the end of this meeting. But it was very helpful.
Would you like me to give you a budget update?
Yes, why don't we do
Okay,
that?
sorry about that. I don't want to forget. So for year-to-date revenue comparison through March 31st, we are at 11.9 million compared to 2021, which was 9.6 million, with a $2.3 million increase.
And that's revenue through, that actually has sales tax only through January.
Through, yeah, the true sales tax is through January, but it's reported in March.
Okay, so there's really gonna be another February, March, April, May, another 5 months of sales tax that will add
Correct.
to this budget. Well, that's good news.
Yeah.
Anything, looks good.
Thank you.
I can tell you from my own personal experience, February, March, and April has been very strong in terms of sales tax. So we have a lot of money. Okay, are there any other comments or questions?
Looking forward to next month.
Yes, I want to thank everyone for being here, especially all the staff. I know it's a lot of time and effort, and I will adjourn the meeting at 6:59. Oh, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
So moved.
So second, well, second.
Okay, Commissioner Robin and Commissioner Soto second. All right, meeting is now adjourned at 6:59 PM. Thank you.
Thank you very
everybody.
much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.